So welcome to this community of practice session on using the Enneagram for Couples report and kind of whetting your appetite for what's possible when working with couples in the coaching space. I'm going to be your host today, and together with me is my co-pilot, Andrea Wiener, who got up very early this morning. So welcome, Andrea. It's wonderful to have you here.
Happy to be here.
And just for those of you that don't know Andrea yet, she is an Enneagram coach and facilitator and an all-round amazing human being. And she is one of the newest faculty members of the Aephoria Enneagram School. So Andrea and I have been working on developing the level 5 training program, which is the Aephoria Couples Training Program, which we will be piloting towards the back end of the year. And part of what we're going to be sharing today will kind of pique your interest, get your juices going around what we're doing here, and maybe create more questions than answers. Because working with a couple is so different to working with just a one-on-one coaching relationship. And we want to help you think about how that's different and what that means for how you do things differently. Anything you want to add as we get started, Andrea?
I think, as Lucille was saying, if you haven't taken advantage of the report, there's so much there. It is so rich, and it is very, very different from the individual report. So I encourage you to just take a look at that and see what it encompasses.
Brilliant. So where we're going to start off is just with this little picture. It's part of what we have in our report as well. And it's part of, if you've done some ORSC training, or if you've worked with couples before, which some of you may well have. I know some of you wear two hats, not just coaching, but therapy as well. So when you work with a couple, you're not just working with two individuals. There's something about the way in which the magic of two people together creates a third entity. Yeah, so there's you, there's me, and then there's this thing called the relationship. And the relationship is a living, dynamic field that exists between the two of us. So when we fall in love, we go on a first date, that field is really a potentiality. It's something that hasn't fully been created yet. But it kind of, that's part of what we sense when we sense that there's a spark between us. We sense that there's this potential for an us field that exists. And that third entity holds the patterns of the relationship, the habits, the way in which it feels for us to be together, which of course changes over time in the life cycle of the relationship. And it can either help us be more of ourselves, or it can also diminish us in some kind of way. And the interesting thing that comes up when we work with couples is really this question around who is my client as the coach. And it's not the one person, and it's not the other person. The client for you, if you're coaching a couple, is the relationship itself. And when you work with the relationship itself, the way in which you engage with what's brought into the room and who says what is so different. So start wrapping your head around that. When I first did ORSC training, one of the exercises that I found most potent was an exercise in which you could, and this is a sneaky one, because in the ORSC training, you can use this exercise even if one person in the couple is only there. But you imagine that there's me and my partner, yeah? And so I will speak from my perspective to my partner. And then the partner can speak from their perspective to me. We can swap positions around as well, in which case, now I'm pretending to be you and speaking to me, and you're pretending to me and speaking to you. Yeah, so get all those switches. But here's the powerful thing of how you step into the third entity. Then you get both people to go and stand in a third perspective and look back at the couple. Imagine we're looking at the couple and then talking to the couple from the voice of the relationship. And so the question here is, what does the relationship want to say to you? What does the relationship want to offer you? What advice does what is the relationship needing? And so in embodying and inhabiting the us space, there's a way in which we can tend to the partnership. We can tend to the field between us in a way that's very different to if it's just you and me talking to each other without the awareness of this us field. In a similar way, when we work with teams, that's what we tap into in teams as well. We say the team gestalt, the team identity, is that created field that comes from the way in which all our magic ingredients get pulled together. And that creates what the team is like. And of course, the leader has an impact on that and a bigger impact than some other people. So that's the team field. The team field, however, has a lot more ingredients going into it. And there's a particular intensity, a particular potency that maybe like getting in touch with the sexual subtype from an Enneagram perspective helps us sense, like sensing the field between us. And that's really what our commitment is to when we are coaching couples. Andrea, over to you.
Yeah, so as Lucille so beautifully illustrated, once we have this third entity that we're aware of as coaches and that we're speaking to, we have to shift our stance in terms of how we show up. And we have to really broaden our awareness of what's present in the space. So our shift becomes on the relationship as client, not on either of the individuals. And of course, we need to be careful in that instance if we've been working with one person in the couple, right? To not bring then biases into that. So we have to really ground ourselves in balance and neutrality in doing this work. Because the communication that's happening in the room is between the me talking to the you talking to the me talking to the coach, the you talking to the coach. And the coach's responsibility is to speak only back into the space of the relationship and hold the whole. So there are a lot of dynamics that come alive when all of this is at play. And not the least of which are our own triggers, our own orientation through the lens of our Enneagram type, our own biases, the types that might challenge us. And so there has to be really a systemic awareness, right? Looking for the dynamics, constantly tracking for those. And that becomes particularly interesting when things actually get activated in session. So, we know as relationships we've been in, whether they are romantic relationships or other relationships, we have patterns that we fall into in dynamics. And what you'll see is that those patterns, as you can imagine, come alive in session. So I had a couple I was working with who, how much gets done in the house, not even who does it, just how much gets done was this constant source of friction. And at one point, the husband was talking about something and the wife was sitting slightly behind him, and I saw her roll her eyes. And I was like, okay, we need to name what's happening here because this is a pattern that's alive. And so you're actually getting great content from the couple, like in the moment. Lucille, is there anything else you would say to that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when things get really heated, so what sometimes happens in working with a couple is there's the version of the couple that wants to show up in the session, and there's the version of the couple that shows up in the session. So I recently had an example where a couple came in and they were late for the session. They were late for the session because the Enneagram 3 had booked his diary to full, and she wanted them to drive together, and then he was late in picking her up. And so the whole way to the session was just a little bit of a friction moment. And so they come into the session about 15 minutes late. And the start of the session is, this is not how we wanted to do this, but. And so what happens for you as a coach when you have the actual argument, which is possibly a pattern, possibly a once-off, we don't know, but it's entering into it's not even brought up in the session, but it's what the session starts with. And there's such an interesting storyline that we then carry. So just imagine for a moment, for those of you that have been in multiple relationships in your adult lives, think of your worst breakup. Yeah? The worst breakup, worst ending to a relationship you ever had. Think of the Enneagram type of that person. Then think of the person, one of the people in the couple sitting across from you has exactly that same profile. Same Enneagram type, same trifix, same instinct stack, and they're acting in the way that the person acted during the time of your breakup. Can you see how easy it might be to get triggered into taking sides and having well, now I need to protect the poor person on the other side of this relationship, because there's a whole lot of projection and things that have happened just in that moment. And I've stopped being in relationship with the us. The client is the us. It's not the person that I have the closest relationship with, or that makes me think of me, or, that I feel needs protection from the other one. All of that's my stuff. And all of it's happening live right there in front of you. Yeah. So maybe what we can do here, Andrea, is just for a moment to just hear one or two comments. We have some amazing experts in the room as well. You've seen that our graphic there comes from Shelley's book, and Shelley's here in the room and has lots of wisdom on couples work as well. So any questions, comments, inputs, just as we get started? What's coming up for you? How do you think working with the us as the client might be different to having an individual across from you as a client, which for most of us as coaches is what we're used to? If Megan is my client, Megan is my client. Versus if a relationship is my client, it's an invisible thing. So how do you think that might change how you coach? What's coming up for you as you just sit with us for a moment? Shelley.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Lucille. I was going to say that in the scenario where I've been working with one person, and then they decide that they want to now have a couple session, is I actually will say that's that if that is the way that they would like to move forward, that their relationship now becomes my client, and they are no longer my client. So if they understand that I'm now transitioning, that contract has now ended, that I'm not looking out for their best interests anymore. I'm looking out for the best interests of the relationship. And all I will do is reflect who needs, and so I stay neutral, and I'm reflecting what is going on in this relationship that you each are either helping or hindering, contributing or contaminating, neglecting or nourishing. So, and once I've made that very clear, I actually start a new contract. We go through the contracting process again.
That's a really clear way to actually transition. And I love that, Shelley. And I know that you have a lot of experience. And I think that's one of the things that coaches here in this group will have to get very clear on, is that transition point and the recontracting and the closing of another contract. And if you still want to continue to be the coach whose client is one person, then maybe you need to work, in partnership with another coach who can have the relationship as the client, because it gets quite messy otherwise.
Yeah, I actually refer on to two separate people after that.
Yeah.
If I'm working with the us, I can't work with one of the me or the you.
Yeah.
It's a conflict of interest.
Yeah.
For me.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So then you refer on. And so that means that there's great opportunity, if this is a field you want to explore, to build strong relationships and referral networks within our broader community here. Yeah. Any other questions, thoughts when you consider the us space as the client?
I'll just add to what Shelley is saying. There's so much I can imagine just training the client. It seems, right, we do our personal development work. We are looking at our patterns and our reactive tendencies. And so I can imagine that this idea of us, like this is a concept that requires a fair amount of maturity, expanded perspective. I think clients, depending on where they're at, will require just a lot of just walking alongside to really understand that us concept. It seems so unique, and I don't know that anyone has had probably a coaching experience or an experience in development.
Yeah. I think there is some abstraction, and yet there is some innate understanding of that concept in my experience. Like we get that there's, you know, when couples say, oh, we've been parenting so much, there's no us time. There's a sense of that in some of the lived experience of when that us is tended and when that us is neglected. And so you can tap into more concrete experiences to help people see that. What I find is really helpful, and that's in our Aephoria space, one of the rooms that gets used for this kind of work when we're in person has a couch and then 2 chairs. And so the one chair is very aptly purple. And that chair is open when the couple is there. So I'm sitting on the green chair and the purple chair is open. And so what you can do is you can also imaginary place the relationship in the purple chair. And it's lovely because it's such a lovely color. But then every now and then when people need to speak from the perspective of the relationship, you can say, do you want to come sit in the chair? And then they look back at the couch and imagine that you're still on the couch and you're talking to the 2 of you now. What does the relationship want to say? So you can use the empty chair and that kind of device quite nicely as well.
And when couples have been, as Lucille was saying, in a situation where they're so focused on the parenting, they're so focused on maybe elder care or something else that is going on, even just reminding them in that context that they are an us, that is what is alive, if that's been neglected at this stage, perhaps.
Simon, do you want to offer something? I think you're unmuted.
Just really quickly, so in the kind of classic therapy or existential psychotherapy anyway, we talk of this idea of bracketing. So bracketing off our stuff and the need for reflexivity constantly, and just thinking about how that gets so amplified because you've got an individual piece of reflexivity around not one individual but 2, and then reflexivity around the couple, the entity itself, and just how bloody hard that is as a practitioner. And then just like real quick, a practical example. Recently, I was working with a male client of mine for 5 years. And then it came out that he'd been having an affair for 4 years of those 5. He hadn't told his wife, but he hadn't told me either. And then he asked me to work with them as a couple to on the repair part of that. And how that was in part a little bit of me going, wow, so you shielded it from her, you shielded it from me as well. And so that whole notion of trying to figure out how I work with that, because there was a little part of me that felt betrayed as well by him through the secrecy. And it's like, well, he couldn't bring it to me, certainly couldn't bring it to his wife. And then what was going on there between me and the 2 of them, and sort of feeling empathy for both, but also just this slight feeling of betrayal as well as the coach, and working with that and just being really, really open with myself around what that could bring in to the work. There's plenty of opportunity for self-deception as practitioners here, and hiding from our own stuff, much amplified in a couple.
much amplified in a couple, and many tricky boundary moments
Mm.
that we need to we need to see the transition points from individual to couples work and choose who the client's going to be from there on. Because there's a different configuration in bringing my coach in to help me talk to you versus the coach serving the couple as well. Yeah. Which kind of brings us to where we wanted to go next, which is there is a difference between couples therapy and couples coaching. And what is that difference? Yeah. So in general, and we may have many different ways to think about this, but it's one of those points where especially people with therapeutic practices can go, okay, coaches, you're getting into our territory now. What is the difference between what you're doing and what I'm doing? So I think the primary focus there in couples coaching is on growth and improving the relationship, building awareness, building skills for co-regulation, building skills for repair, different practices for growth and connection, or working potentially on future goals. Whereas therapy is a lot more around healing past wounds, psychological issues, trauma, dysfunction. And so the piece that's more in the here and now and focusing on growth, awareness, and skills in service of a conscious relationship, it's very different to the kind of clinical mental health views there. And of course, those two things are going to have a boundary where they touch. But a question that you can ask yourself here is, when would I refer on? What would indicate to me that this is not couples coaching, but something that actually requires a licensed therapist, someone who's specializes in the counseling side of that? So restoration, functioning of healing, relational repair. Now, some of you wear two hats. Some of you in this room have therapeutic and coaching practices. And so you may, kind of work more broadly in the couple space. But there is a question around, when does it feel like you're moving from one modality to the next? Andrea, any thoughts that you have around the difference here?
I think the timeline can often be very different. As Simon was saying, working with an individual client in therapy for 4 or 5 years, coaching, because it can be very, goal focused and growth focused and specific, can be a shorter time, but not necessarily. And obviously coaching can be complementary to therapy, but I think it's just that, as we've been talking about up until now, that really heightened awareness of what's present in the room. And so noticing, naming patterns and shifting those, but as coaches, we're not working with trauma directly. And so when that becomes very apparent, then it's the need for referrals there.
Anyone else with a thought or a comment on this? I think one could do quite focused, short cycle couples coaching. So it would be, working with the individuals to get to know their Enneagram, working with them for a couple of sessions to process their report, and off they go into the world with greater awareness. Versus the couples therapist who may work with the couple every week, every 2 weeks, every month for 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years. Or maybe also sometimes couples therapy can be more crisis intervention based. But anyone else with a thought around the structure, the modality, the handover points here? I think there's a lot of people. Yeah.
I'm happy to share. Oh, sorry, I misread.
Thanks, Shirley.
When someone is telling me the reason that they're doing something is linked to some trauma or some childhood experience or like some deep psychological wound, then I would refer on to some kind of trauma counselor, especially, things like unable to regulate themselves. So, if you are not able to self-regulate, because there's childhood, you know, and if you're working with an ACE, then it's very difficult for someone who's not able to self-regulate. So then I would refer on so that they can get the skills to do that first, so that they can, you know, because the problem lies within the me. It shows up in the us space, but it's a me issue.
Yeah. Yeah, and that might only become apparent sometimes in a couple's debriefing session or a couple's coaching session, that there is a me piece that needs some additional healing and tending and care.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. One of the scenarios we get a lot, I don't know if others get this, is where people experience the Enneagram in an executive team session or in their coaching, and they go, oh my word, I love this so much. I'm sure my wife, my husband at home, my partner is a type X. And please, you know, just do an Enneagram for them. And then there's the opportunity to also do a very focused couples coaching intervention, which is just about building awareness, creating language between us for our individual patterns. But it's not targeting any particular problem or issue that we have. We're just wanting to get to know each other better. That's a great example of where this works as well. Love more. I see your hands up.
Yes, good afternoon, everybody. I have a question. So you said that as a coach, your client is the us space. Yeah. Assuming that these people have not, the two people that you're dealing with are first time, are being assessed for the first time on the Enneagram. All right. The debriefing of the individuals, is it necessary, or you are just going straight to because I'm thinking the couples report is now what we are referring to as the us. So what are we saying about the debriefing of the two couples?
Great question. Andrea, do you want to take this one?
Sure. Thanks, Lovemore. Yes, the way that we suggest and that it's built into the process is really, to your point, to individually debrief first. For each of the individuals in the relationship to understand what their own patterns are, what their type is, especially if they're new to the Enneagram, what's informing their behavior. It's almost as if, particularly if one knew the Enneagram and brought the other one in, it's a tremendous disservice for them not to be equally well informed about the details of their type. And what I've seen a lot of, and we'll speak to later, is also their instinct stacking, how that impacts their behavior. So it's a really important piece that is foundational to then move into the couples report with. Lucille, anything else you want to say on that?
Yeah, I think that's the arc that you'll find most of the time. And I think Shelley has an arc that's slightly different, where you do one session with the couple to contract more and then do individual sessions and then bring them together as well. So, but the core thing is you're not going to have the really deep, meaty us conversation that builds awareness without the individuals having done some processing around their own stuff. And there's a power differential if one person knows the Enneagram and the other one does not. And you want to kind of equalize the power in that way. And there's so much more useful things that come up. So if you think about this, if I haven't digested my own profile, the chances of me like putting my stuff on you and like blaming and like projecting, and it's the problem because I'm not looking in the mirror first. The chances of that happening, and therefore a defensive reaction, and therefore a like spinning up of the intensity of the conversation, is so much more as compared to when I'm digesting my own stuff a bit. And you even get some homework to think about, like, so how am I contributing to, how my patterns contributing and creating the us space? You know, what's my part of this? So that's very important. Yeah.
And something else I'll add to that is, as Lucille was saying, with a power dynamic, if one person knows the Enneagram and the other one doesn't, you may also, and probably often, be dealing with the fact that this was one person's idea and not the other's. So you also have to be aware of the challenge in the room, of the fact that one of the couples is much more invested maybe at the onset of this work than the other. And so leveling the playing field in any way possible is helpful to mitigate the power dynamic that can get offset in this space.
So when we then look at the cycle of relationships, and this is a kind of process that we get and a view we get from Imago, it's important to also note that when you meet, the relationship might be, you know, in very different phases of the cycle of the relationship. And this is not a one-way pattern, but generally how it goes is we fall in love. And there's like infatuation, it's called the honeymoon period. You can do no wrong. I can do no wrong. Us is wonderful. Us is alchemically beautiful and full of magic. And we haven't had many fights yet, and we can't get enough of each other. I have some very fond memories of a winter where I don't know where that winter went, and I can't even remember if I had a job, but I know I did. But somewhere in there, I fell in love, you know, and it was a wonderful winter, and I can't remember anything other than how wonderful it was. So the romantic phase. When you meet a couple in this phase, their conversation with you is going to be very different to when the couple is in the power struggle phase. And in the power struggle phase, like through the honeymoon period, and shit gets real. And in the shit gets real phase, we're getting scratchy with each other, and we're having our first disagreements, and maybe we moved in together and it was a great idea, and now the fact that you don't do the toilet paper in the way I do the toilet paper is starting to drive me nuts, and some much bigger thoughts around that. But here our differences are surfacing. And as much as our Enneagram types in the romantic phase were wonderful differences, in the power struggle phase, they start being the things that annoy me most. And if we can negotiate the power struggle phase well, there's often this point of like, so are we doing this? Are we doing this, or are we not doing this? And if we're not doing this, then, you know, interest goes elsewhere, or we break up. And what in the Imago process we say is like, the real thing is that the intentional parts of the relationship really start here when we say, yes, we're doing this. We're doing this despite the fact that it's hard. And we recommit, we do the work. And here the us starts getting tended, not accidentally just because we're in love, but we're in dialogue, we're in conscious communication, we're on the balcony looking at the relationship, we're owning our patterns. And that gives then the relationship the opportunity to mature into a deep mutual shared bond. Now, sometimes what happens is that, and it's not a one-way street, because of course things can happen. We're awakening and doing the work, and then something radical happens in the relationship, and we go right back there, and we asking the question again, are we really doing this? The interesting thing that I think is happening in the modern world, where a lot of our technology is breeding a desire for instant gratification and my needs being unquestioningly met, is that there's something of this power struggle piece that is becoming, that's being bad-mouthed. You know, like the moment there's friction, you know, it's a toxic relationship. We're very quick to call things toxic. Not everything is toxic. Sometimes it's just normal boundaries clashing against each other. And if we can't figure out how to do this piece in relationship, there's a part of our maturation that relies on relationality that just never enters the building. And so if we go, the moment there's friction, you should dump him, it's toxic, or, or AI is more satisfying in conversation than my partner because they just always say, yes, that was a great idea. Shall I give you more? Then we miss out on some aspects of our relational growth. One of my teachers, Judy Becker, always said that relationships are the anvil. A relationship is the anvil on which our souls are forged. But it's forged through this piece here. This piece is just wonderful. That's just deciding alchemically the reaction comes together, but the hammer hasn't started hitting on the anvil yet. So relationship is the anvil on which our souls are forged. Andrea, anything you want to add here around this cycle?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say relative to that instant gratification and the resolving things, I've heard a few different teachers say, that our personality is our defense against love. And so in these conflict moments when the most difficult challenges are happening, when our type lens is potentially exacerbating them or obscuring, clarity for us in terms of what's happening, it's very easy for us to default to our, programming and not try to stretch. And so as Lucille was, and then depending on type, some types are going to have, perhaps threes might see conflict as failure, and that doesn't work for them. So, there are different types who are having different reactions to what conflict looks like and how to resolve that. So it's always a good awareness to be carrying.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, of course, what's going to exacerbate this even further is that we are likely to fall in love with people that in some way hold in our inner worlds. From an imago perspective, we say, I fall in love with people that I think can complete me. And then what happens is, someone else can never do the inner work for us. So then they don't completely complete me. They're just so different to me. And I may well choose someone that in some way has a high chance of re-wounding me in the way that some of the original childhood wounds that I carry around with me. So there's like interesting ways in which this pattern has much more to say as well than just what's happening between us, but more to say about our individual work and the pattern that we go through in life in our own maturation and development.
Well, and these cycles play out within the bigger arcs of our life stages as well, right? Like couples don't exist in a vacuum, as we've been talking about. There's families, there's children, there's aging, there's our culture. So many things shape the dynamics that show up in our partnerships. And so different stressors surface at different times in our family life cycle. And then something else to keep in mind is family life cycle might look very different for a heteronormative couple than it does for a queer family. And so we need to be aware of what our conventional norms are around relationships. And I think we also need to, something we've been speaking to in the relationship cycle is how do also our type and our instincts and defensive show up for us across life stages, different moments. I know for me, I'm very aware right now of my dominant instinct and how that is showing up for me in this stage of my life. And so it's something else. The Enneagram provides great nuance to these family life cycle implications. And there's just a tremendous diversity that we have to keep in mind for all of these. And Lucille, do you want to talk a little bit about sort of the idea of bias and how that plays into how we do this work with different families?
Yeah, absolutely. And exactly. The idea you have right now, as you sit here, you have an idea that may be more consciously in your awareness or maybe quite subconscious around what the ideal relationship looks like, what the shape is that it takes. Is it between a man and a woman? Is it between a woman and a woman? A man and a man? Is it between two people? Is it a polyamorous relationship? Is it a polygamous relationship? Is it, so there are lots of ideas we carry around that. And based on the ideas you carry about what the ideal form is, or even more specific, what the norm should be, how all relationships should be. If you find a family and a relationship coming into your practice that doesn't have those same ideas, you might think that you are serving the relationship by coaching into the norms you carry. But it's very important to note that those are just your norms. And you can't see all those things. So you can't say, well, I'm only going to work with couples who comply with these and these and these standards. You don't know whether an affair has been part of this couple's journey or not. You know, couples may not talk about the divorce when they say, oh, we want the session, but actually we're a blended family and there's divorce. And in your inner world, that may or may not be okay. So I think it's important to know that when you're working with couples, because of the intimacy of the conversation, there's a whole lot of other stuff that comes up that wouldn't normally be in your standard workplace coaching session. And some of them are kind of represented here. Andrea?
Yeah, so if you look at this word cloud, notice which words pop out for you. Notice which you may have may have immediate feelings about. Somewhere you may have biases. This is highlighting that there is a tremendous breadth of relational forms and themes, and they're layered, as we've been saying. And so we need to be aware of not contributing to the destructive patterns that can emerge when we're working with couples. And I mean, I had an interesting conversation recently where I was talking to a teacher, former teacher and friend of mine, and I had mentioned I'd been married more than once. And he said to me that he's always carried some bias that he's aware of now about people who had been divorced and married more than once. And he said, and then I recently realized after getting married myself that as a gay man, if I had been legally allowed to be married, I probably would have been divorced several times by now. And so there are all of these facets there that are in play about his bias and his experience and that shifting. And so we talked before about regulation, and we'll talk more about that coming up, but it is so essential as we step into this work to really regulate, not just somatically, but also intellectually as we come into session with couples.
And you might ask yourself, are there any topics on here that you would feel yourself blush a little bit if you had to talk about them? How would you feel about a couple in session and you think you're just going to do a standard debrief, but there is a section in the report, which we'll look at later, that talks about intimacy, and they want to talk about their sex life and what's going right and wrong there? How would you feel about that? How would you feel about people talking about their finances? Is there a difference talking about relationship finances in coaching versus the organization's finances? You know, is there an edge there in some kind of way? I am very blessed by the fact, maybe blessed, cursed, I don't quite know, by the fact that my father was a therapist with very bad boundaries that I grew up with. Love you, Dad, if you're watching this. But he was a sex therapist, amongst other things, and he practiced quite a lot in his practice around sex therapy when I was like 8, 9, 10, 11 years old, and into my early teenage life. And so there was a normalization around talking about those things in our household that I don't think most people have grown up with. And even there are some things that are hard for me to speak about and some things that are not. But you have to find your language, and you have to be able to meet those topics when they come up in your stride as a coach. And remember, you're not taking sides, you're serving the relationship. So we are going to pop you in a breakout room. And in your breakout room, we're going to ask you to it's just a quick 10-minute breakout. If I were to do a couples coaching session tomorrow, what would some of my anxieties and fears be? What are some of the topics I'd go, I hope they don't talk about this? Or, what do I think would be easy? What would be harder for me if I were to do this tomorrow? And are there specific questions that I am carrying about my ability to do this just right now, imagining that I'm doing this tomorrow? It's just a 10-minute breakout. Anything you'd like to add to that, Andrea?
Well, I think just also naming if there are potential biases that you think that might surface for you as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so here we go, and see you back here in 10 minutes.
So welcome back.
That was a very short 10 minutes.
We'd love to hear some shares from your experience. Would anyone like to say a little bit?
I'd be
Well,
happy
maybe
to.
can I?
Oh, go ahead, Lovemore.
Okay, thank you. All right, so well, in one interesting discussion we had in our group was if during the conversation the discussion on sex comes up, and then one of the couple of the partners has an addiction to pornography, how would that be handled? Yeah, and so there were very good insights that were shared that, well, from experience, as long as there's an addiction involved, it has to be referred so that the people can get help. Yeah, so I think I'll leave some for others.
Thank you, Lovemore. Joe?
Yeah, so I think we talked about our fears and our biases and our triggers all in one. And I was chatting to Kate, and it started with women and women's roles. We both coach people in the workplace, so are not familiar with the couples coaching, but we're kind of thinking through if we were couples coaching. So, women and women's roles and being biased towards our own experiences and women's roles and the role of a mother and the multiple roles of a mother at a working mom. The other was religion, where a couple would bring religious perspectives into the session, and how one would deal with that. We talked a little bit about politics and then polarized views. So where couples had very polarized views around things like vaccinate or don't vaccinate, supporting Israel or supporting Palestine, being a Democrat or a Republican, abortion, no abortion, those kind of big topics that I think trigger many people, and it's difficult not to have a view, and how one kind of, is aware of that going into those couple sessions. That was the gist of our conversation.
Joe, can I ask something just about that? So is that an anxiety about there being trickiness for the couple and their differing views, or is it anxiety about your own relationship to those topics and that's what makes you anxious?
I think it would be about my own relationship to being triggered, I think, or being able to remain objective. I think I would struggle to remain objective and not take sides. And I think I'm thinking aloud here, but I think I would find it difficult having not prepared or to not have anticipated, oh, they're going to start fighting about the COVID vaccine. And all of these things are kind of things that I've fought with my family and husband, and so things that are very close to home that are polarizing in my own world. How one remains objective and stands outside of that and allows the conversation to happen without one's views getting mixed up.
Yeah, I think in the space when these kinds of activations happen, one of the invitations is to move from the dance floor onto the balcony. On the dance floor, we're talking about the COVID vaccine. On the balcony, the question is, how do we talk about differences like this? And that's really the perspective shift, because your role as the coach is not to help. You're not a mediator in the argument. Yeah. Your role is to help the couple gain awareness on how they navigate the differences and the activation points and how they dysregulate together and co-regulate together. And so that's something that you can maybe just like take to heart. Just put it here. My job is on the balcony, not on the dance floor. And if I can remember it, then people can talk about anything. And my job is to help people think about how we talk about these things and how we navigate it rather than to mediate. And that's one of the tricky bits when we work in any kind of triadic relationship, where the coach is with the couple or two pairs in a workplace relationship. Mediator gets triggered very quickly. And mediator is about, helping us find the resolution. But mediator is on the dance floor and coaching happens on the balcony. Yeah. Anyone else that wants to share? I think Nazima, I saw you unmute at some point. I don't know if it's still valid.
Yeah, Lucille, just one thing that I mentioned was the difficulty I'm having at the moment with someone where there's it's with a young person, there's a confession around what they've done. So, for example, a confession around infidelity or whatever, and that's making it okay. And so I guess it's a trigger for me in terms of kind of what's okay and what's not okay. Just because someone admits to being a pedophile doesn't mean that it's okay. And so it gets quite tricky. Like, I'm not seeing the couple, I'm just seeing the one person. But it is something around, I'm finding in young people where there's a confession around what they're doing, and that then makes things okay in the relationship. Yeah, which obviously I'm coming from another generation where that's just not okay. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of like once you confess, you get, that's your penance, and then you're absolved. And the relationship might not see it like this. So I think that's where, even if you're not coaching the couple, there's something interesting about offering the perspective of the other and the relationship. So doing that kind of relationship systems coaching work where, okay, now you've confessed here. Pretend you've confessed to your partner. Now step into your partner's shoes. What does the partner want to say or ask? How do they feel about this? Speak now as if you're your partner. And that can be useful. But then the third perspective, what does the relationship want to say to you about how this is playing out? Yeah. Knowing that whatever your thoughts are about what the relationship's saying, may not be helpful. But it is an interesting thing to just note generational differences around a whole lot of things. There's always also different value sets that come through all the generations across time. Yeah. And what is it, that trend? The trend is as we age towards conservatism, regardless of how liberal we started off. Not true for everyone, but the general trend is that in our ideas about how the world should work, not about voting, but in our ideas about how the world should work, there is a somewhat predictable trend, but not completely predictable trend in that. Yeah. So I want us to just very briefly look at our report and what it looks like, just so people get a bit of a sense of it. So this is the HTML version of the report. From tomorrow, you'll be able to get the printed version as well. So it starts, there's a little navigation bar here, which you can use and can take you wherever you want to go, just to give you a sense of that. But it starts off with just why the Enneagram for couples, how to use the report, some suggestions on how to get the most from it. And then we start by looking at the you and the me. So here we've got, interestingly, 2 Enneagram 6s in a relationship together, which should be a pretty interesting ride. But we can see that we've got a 6-1-2 and a 6-9-3, so different trifixes. We can see dominant instincts. We can see blind instincts. And really, this is what we utilize in our report. In different places, we draw on different things, but a lot of the content is written for type, trifix, dominant instinct, blind instinct together to help us think about intimacy and finance and family life and all of those things. So we're not just talking type to type in the content. So if you get the report for 2 Enneagram 6s together and the next couple has a different trifix, the report content will not be the same. So just to say that, to give you an idea of the level of granularity we've gone to. So this starts with you and me. And then our first glimpse of the us is in this piece, which is in many ways it's a sweet and simple paragraph, but it gives you a sense of what the potentiality in a healthy, conscious us is. And so that is one of the places that I often read this to a couple. So I'd read this out loud and then have them reflect on this. We then have just type with type. We start what works well, what are the typical challenges, and then we look at the instincts together, how the instincts stack, what the alignment and misalignment might be between these stacks. And then we start going a little bit deeper into the fixation, vice virtue of the types, and how that comes together as core synergies and friction points and family of origin and potential rewounding dynamics. And this is one of my favorite bits, the scripts. So it teaches, so from that place of helping couples become more conscious, it gives examples of ways in which we can offer each other language to validate and see each other's worlds and validate each other's perspectives and build bridges and offer invitations. And sometimes it's useful to say, are there any of these things or a variation on that you think could be useful to say? So after the fight about vaccines, and we're on the balcony and we've spoken about how we fight, and say, are there any of these scripts that may be useful in the moment? And they can look at it and say, well, you're safe with me, even when doubts visit. Yeah. So the scripts are very useful. Then we've also got the when things get rough. This might also be useful in the COVID vaccine conversation. How do we talk about our differences? So the defenses and the lines of stress. So we might work with projection, the stress line, and it helps the partner see so it's on the balcony. So what happens for you and what happens for me when we both get triggered, so that we can work towards repair more easily. And that leads into some suggestions on how to navigate conflict, on how to build more intimacy. So that will talk about emotional intimacy, but also about sex and physical intimacy. We've got some things on family life and parenting, which may or may not be valid depending on the context that a couple has chosen. But it's often a very important for those couples that choose to parent, a very important part of the conversation, managing finances, practical challenges. And then there's a section on development. And you'll see here the way in which we do this is stuff for me, stuff on how I can support you better, and stuff we can do together. So stuff for me, stuff for how I can support you, and stuff we can do together. So this together speaks to the us part of our relationship. And then we've got a couple of coaching exercises. So one for just doing basic reflection on the relationship dynamics. This could help you structure a kind of coaching session, very powerful. We've got a somatic exercise for those that have not been able to kind of really get into the lived experience of their partner, like getting into each other's bodies, like practicing a body posture that relates to my trifix as a way of building understanding and intimacy and compassion for each other. Exercise 3 is a co-regulation exercise, and we'll talk later about co-regulation. So when our nervous systems get too activated, how can we regulate ourselves and regulate together? And the last exercise is the moving towards repair when there is conflict. So supporting when one person leads the conversation, when the other leads the conversation, and if we're doing this together. And each of these exercises has a little why it works section to give you a sense of, so you get to see how to facilitate it, but also why it works if you need to express that. There's an appendix around just summary of the different types. And then my favorite little graph to help you see where our types are similar. So here you can see both of us are Enneagram 6s, but look here, this one is a lot more 5, and this one has a lot more 2 here, and this one has more 9. So you can see where we also miss each other in terms of energetics. And I know that you found this also quite helpful, Andrea. So what have you found helpful in working with this report so far?
Yeah, I mean, this, I just debriefed a couple who basically, when we got to this graphic, we're like, why can we have this? How do we have a copy of this? Is this in our report? This was actually wildly helpful. But what I found really helpful, there's a couple pieces. And I'll relate an experience I had recently to frame that really beautifully. So I was debriefing a couple, as we were talking about before, I worked with an exec team. The wife was on the team. She thought it would be really helpful for their relationship, and she asked if I would do a debrief for the two of them. So they're both sexual 3s, but he is self-pres very close second in terms of the instinct stacking. And she's self-preservation blind. And so they share the sexual 3 priorities of like creating the attractive image, directing energy to pleasing others, home and family, and that team mentality is really essential to them. But his over-indexing, I wouldn't say over-indexing, his strong indexing for type 1 in his trifix, as well as his high self-pres, tilted him towards his image direction was very much about their home. And so he, for example, one of the things he related was that everything has to be meticulous. When you open the cabinets, everything has to be in particular order. And then she made the point that to really understand the level of his rigidity around this, that he vacuums the pool deck, the swimming pool deck in the backyard with a vacuum cleaner. And so and he had been in the military. So that had really calcified these aspects. And so her sexual dominant drive for connection and her self-pres blind meant that, you know, when she came home from work, even if she was exhausted, she was trying to keep up with his standards. And for example, if he was traveling, wanted him to come home to an immaculate house, even though she'd been managing the baby, the dog, and she's the chief operating officer of a well-known company. And so this is where understanding their instinct stacking and the conflicts that arose there, as well as the difference in their trifixes, was really important for them. And so he kept saying, like, he wanted frameworks. At the beginning of the session, when I asked what they wanted, she wanted communication support and he wanted frameworks. And so another piece that has been really valuable to me are these exercises, which I both recommend to couples and actually implement in session. So for example, because sexual 3s can have a hard time talking about themselves, I suggested that they use this "what I carried" exercise. He didn't even want to talk about what he had done, what he had taken care of. And so in the session, they started sharing in the past week what they had carried, what they had done that the other might not be aware of. And it was incredible to witness the experience between the two of them as they shared this. There was a palpable softening. I mean, she had been rolling her eyes about the pool vacuuming thing, but there was a palpable softening between the two of them. And whereas she had been sitting slightly behind him and they were both facing forward, they turned their chairs like unconsciously more toward one another as they were having this conversation. So even like their posturing and their somatic connection changed. And so you could feel the co-regulation between the two of them. He had been making a bunch of phone calls to get something repaired. The fence around the pool deck, which she was concerned about for the baby, and she had no idea. And she was holding the idea of like, okay, now this is just something else I'm gonna have to do and take care of. And he had no idea that she was feeling the pressure because he keeps telling her, oh, it's just that I like it this way. You don't need to feel the pressure. So he had no idea that she was carrying the anxiety of having the house be absolutely perfect when he walked in the door after being gone for 2 weeks. And so they agreed. I suggested that every Friday they debrief and have this conversation about what I carried. And they were really happy and excited to do that because that would never, as sexual threes, it never would have occurred to them. They're just plowing forward as like, this is my image, this is what I do, this is what we're creating. And so it was helpful for them to understand both how the intensity of their sexual dominant instincts was fueling fire around things, but also how when you looked at how their instincts stack and also their trifixes differed, how much that shifted how they related to one another. Lucille, any color you want to?
Yeah, I think that's such a wonderful story. And I think that is something that you feel is when, and obviously you can feel it more when you're doing in-person work. This work can happen on screen, but sometimes it's helpful to have the couple on the same screen as opposed to on two different screens. Yeah, if they can be in the room next to each other, because then you can see they can still talk to each other like this. Because it's a dynamic that shifts when you're working with a couple, is when they're talking to the coach and then they turn to each other. And there's two versions of turning to each other in the session. The one is turning to each other because now we're going to have the fight. That's one version. And the other version is the version where, oh, I'm hearing you. There's compassion, there's understanding, there's like insight, there's connection, there's co-regulation that starts to happen. And you can feel the difference between the talking through you, because the coach now needs to help them understand my perspective or whatever it is, to the we're pulling towards each other in this way. And that's why it can be very useful to have people on the screen together as opposed to on separate screens. Yeah, that's my preference. Yeah.
And one other thing I would add as it's occurring to me, because we were talking about, Lovemore's question about debriefing them individually beforehand, and Shelley's really important point about contracting and the clarity of that, is that it's really important to, in the debrief, because you're holding confidentiality, to contract for if something comes up that is deeply personal or that hasn't been surfaced, to contract for whether that is something that you can speak to in the session with them together or not. And it comes up because I have a couple who I'm going to work with on Thursday. She's a sexual 8 and he is a social 9. I had never met him before. I've been working with her. And we got in the session and he immediately started talking about their sex life. And I'm working with her primarily in a work context, but her now understanding her unintended impact as a sexual 8 has shifted focus to be also about their relationship. But I was completely not expecting this as a topic that was going to come up, because she and I, as you can imagine, for sexual 8, vulnerable topics are not something that she surfaces in sessions. And so I've had to contract really clearly with what is okay when we're working together to surface that you may not have talked about.
Yeah. Yeah. So that actually brings us into part of the kind of theory share that we want to offer you today, and that is to share some of the work of the Gottmans, specifically around the 4 horsemen and the research around communication patterns that are less than useful, toxic communication patterns. And a lot of Dr. Gottman's research is longitudinal. So he says that in looking at some of these patterns, the way in which the patterns play out can actually help predict what the long-term story in a relationship is going to be in different ways. And so part of what we can help couples with when we're on that balcony is to find whether there are some of these horsemen that are showing up in the relationship, and to also practice the antidote to them. Because just because they're there doesn't mean that we can't find a better way of communicating, especially if we grew up in a family system, in a family of origin, where a lot of this was the communication pattern. And so we haven't been schooled, we haven't practiced conscious communication in that way, or it hasn't been part of our relationship life up to now. So these 4 horsemen of criticism, contempt, defensiveness, and stonewalling are incredibly useful to be able to name in the moment when they come up in sessions, and to offer alternative practices. Andrea.
Again, I think I'll just mention, for the level 5 training, we will, of course, be speaking to the report and all the aspects and all the Enneagram aspects, but we'll also be speaking to frameworks like this from people like the Gottmans and Esther Perel, the Imago work of Harville Hendricks, so that as coaches and therapists, if it's not a framework you're aware of, you are getting additional tools to help support your work with couples. So that's why we're speaking to a piece of this today. And Lovemore, did you have a question?
Yes. Just your previous insight that you shared, and it got me wondering if did you say that a couple, one person in the couple can say, I do not want to talk about this issue if it comes up? What if it's the issue that is really the bone of contention? Is that how do you handle that?
Lucille,
so is that the conversation around the one partner going, I want to talk about sex, and the other one's not? Yeah. So Andrea, how did you deal with it in that context?
I asked him if, I asked him if he would be willing to surface it, but because she's so sensitive about it, I suggested that instead of catching her off guard, that they may want to have a conversation beforehand about what they're wanting from this session, and then sort of give her the opportunity without having her be blindsided. We know how that might go for a sexual aide who's not aware of their impact, as she has said she's not. And to just, again, have contract for how that's going to be handled outside of the session. So he was having a conversation with her about what that was going to look like.
So he said at the start of his individual session, I want to talk about our sex life. And so then you were able to contract and set it up in that way.
Right.
So I think this thing about when it comes up in session and you have no idea, but the one person says, I don't want to talk about it. Yeah. I think let's talk about the horseman and Gottman's work to give you some ideas of the antidotes of what to work with, because some of that might be stonewalling, some of that might be defensiveness. And so I think where we're going now is going to help us if it comes up naturally and we weren't able to contract around how to bring those things in.
Yeah, ahead of time. Thank you. So as Lucille was saying, John Gottman observed couples for decades in his, what they called their love lab. And he was saying that with this work that they were able to predict divorce with 90% accuracy. And so the reason this is so important is because communication is at the foundation, right, of how we relate, how we resolve conflict. And so these four horsemen are universal markers of relational breakdown. They're not type specific, they're not culture bound. And his point in the work is that if they're left not unattended, that they will erode connection and trust so badly that that is how things will end up in divorce. So it's our job as coaches and therapists to help couples notice these patterns and name them in real time. Like that client I said, she was rolling her eyes, which is contempt, which we'll get to. And then practice in session, not just send them home with these ideas, but practice in session the antidotes to these. So like quickly, one by one, we'll speak to these. So criticism, the first one. Criticism, as we know, is like, well, you always do this, this is a problem. There's a difference between complaint and criticism. Complaint is, I need or I feel like I'm not getting this. Criticism is you do or don't do this in an accusatory manner. And so the antidote for that is, and I'm going to move relatively quickly through these, but you'll have the recording, is what's called the gentle startup. And that is to approach the challenge that you're having with the other person, instead of through criticism, through the lens of I statements, stating what you need, how you feel when you're not getting what you need, and allowing that to neutralize part of what you're saying. The next, and theoretically from Gottman's perspective, the most dangerous and the strongest predictor of divorce is contempt. So communication, as many of you probably know, is 7% verbal. The rest of it is body posture, facial expressions, tone, the words that we choose to use. And so for contempt, somebody might not even say something. There might be eye rolling. There might be an air of superiority. Language might be tinged with sarcasm. And so the antidote for defense is something that needs to be done not just in the moment, but in an ongoing way. And that's to build a culture of appreciation. Acknowledging small things often. My partner makes coffee for me every morning, and I thank him every morning at some point for making coffee so that it doesn't get taken for granted. And so we need to be aware foundationally of what, now that might seem a little excessive to some of you, but we're both sexual dominant, so it makes sense for us to start connection early. So just that small things often, when couples are aware that contempt is present, is really important.
Yeah, and I think there's that neuroscience ratio, right? We need at least 4 times as much praise as we need criticism. And so that culture of appreciation is a brain thing as well, in a big way.
Yeah, absolutely. Next, defensiveness. This is the victim stance. It's blame shifting. It's the example of that is it's not me, it's you. And I think when I talk to people and they grapple with not getting defensive when they feel hurt or upset by the other person, when I tell them that the antidote is to accept responsibility, it doesn't mean to accept responsibility for what's transpired. It's accepting responsibility, like even partially. So perhaps saying, you know what, I reacted more strongly to that than I wanted to. And you really hurt my feelings, or something along those lines that allows there to be a conversation versus just shutting things down. And apropos of shutting things down, the final of the 4 horsemen is stonewalling. So stonewalling, because it often involves not speaking, it's withdrawal, it's just shutting down, it's this, arms crossed, moving back from the other person. And Gottman has a term that I love that many of you are probably familiar with called emotional flooding, where we get to a point in an argument or an engagement with someone where we are just overwhelmed and we are not able to self-regulate or co-regulate. And so we may tune out mid-conversation, we may even walk away. And so the antidote to that is really being able to self-soothe. It's saying, you know what, I need to take a break this conversation is important to me, but I'm flooded. Like, can we resume this in 10 minutes or an hour so that you have the opportunity to self-soothe? Because in those instances, co-regulation is probably not possible.
Yeah. There's such an interesting piece around how Gottman did some of this research. So when he saw that the couple got to a place where there was emotional flooding in a conversation, they would go, oh, can we just take a quick break because there's something wrong with our research equipment? And they would stop the conversation for 15 minutes and say to them, while we're busy, just hold the conversation. And, you know, there'd be some magazines or something there, and give them each a magazine to just look through. And then 15 minutes later, they're like, okay, the equipment's working again. And they'd look at how people come back to the conversation. And invariably, just the self-soothing of like going through the magazine and not talking about it meant that the conversations came back in a more constructive space 15 minutes later than where they were at when he broke it off with the equipment is not working as the excuse. So interesting research. Yeah.
Yes, and while any Enneagram type can use any horseman, some of our tendencies of type in terms of our defense strategies mean that we might have an inclination to use one of these defenses more than others. So the Enneagram actually can provide a helpful diagnostic frame for this work. And so, for example, ones might be more inclined to criticism because of the high standards that they hold for themselves and others. Twos may be prone to defensiveness, you know, saying like, I was only helping, you know, I was trying to like help do the right thing for you. Threes and fours, and again, these are not exclusive. Contempt can arise for them. Just for threes, maybe it's for a different reason than fours. Maybe for threes, it's image superiority. For fours, maybe it's being dismissive, like, oh, you wouldn't understand me, or you wouldn't get this. Likewise, fives and sevens might both stonewall, but sevens might do it to withdraw from having an emotional engagement, whereas fives might be avoiding or conserving energy. And so it's just interesting to sort of consider what defense strategies of each type may inform these. It's not about boxing in the types. It's just being aware of potential likelihood that these arise.
And so maybe here, just a point to just take one or two questions or comments. What are you recognizing in yourself? Are there particular horsemen that you gallop with more often? Do you think that this relates to your type in any kind of way? Let's just get one or two comments. Or, you know, if you've worked with couples, what have you seen play out? But let's try and keep it personal. What have you noticed as you're sitting here? We're always working on our own relationship patterns too. And it may not just be in intimate relationships. Maybe there are some of these horsemen that are in friendships or, you know, other relationships where you're having some insights too. Yeah. Anyone that'd like to share?
I'll
Karen?
share something a little bit more intimate or personal. In my first marriage, I became aware of the fact that respect became more important for me than love. And so I can definitely see my threeness having felt a lot of contempt in that relationship. And then with my trifix, my 7-9-ness, the withdrawal that came through. So it feels like a good fit for me personally.
And so for you, what the pattern from the balcony you can see there is a kind of a progression in sequence, right? So
Yeah.
it's like first when I feel that there's no respect, I meet it with contempt. Yeah. And then from there, if there's not some restoration of respect, then the withdrawal, that's the second. So the main type leads and the rest of the trifix follows. Now that's an interesting pattern to play with for all of us. Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you.
Anyone else that'd like to share?
Kate, were you going to say something?
Yeah, I really relate to contempt as an an Essex Enneagram 4, I think that's where I go. It's a sort of a superiority. Everybody else is, or that person is not playing their part or not taking responsibility, or so I can really relate to that. And equally, Karen, in my first marriage, I think that was part of what was playing out. One of the dynamics.
Yeah, and Kate, now if you look at how you're working with that, you know, and this idea of the antidote for the contempt, in some way being inside building a culture of appreciation. Do you relate to that at all? Does the antidote make sense?
Antidote definitely makes sense. And my second marriage is, I'm married to an Enneagram 2, and he loves appreciation. And I know that. So it's a much more natural thing to bring. But I think that is helpful. But I think the main thing that helps me now is, now that I know the pattern, I catch it before it plays out.
Yeah.
Not always,
Yeah.
but mostly I catch it. And I'm like, oh, here we go again. And I observe it. And that is what changes it. Yeah.
Yeah, of course, if the horseman doesn't have to gallop, then it's much better to not need the antidote. It's like, if there's no poison, we don't need the antidote.
Yeah.
And that's a much better equation. Yeah. Beautiful.
Thanks for sharing, Kate.
We have time for one more comment if anyone else would like to share. We've had people from the heart center here in the table, 3 and 4. Anyone from another center? Marley from the head center.
Yeah, I am 279, 792, so I'm all in stonewalling. And I think my learning process has been to speak through conflict. And yeah, I would just shut down from every center in every way. Like, don't want to fight, don't want to be mean, and definitely don't want to engage in anything negative. So it's just like, no.
Yeah.
Not ideal.
And the antidote to that, if you go like, when I catch myself in it and I'm already in it, this idea of self-soothing, does that make sense to you?
Yeah, I do think everything around, like, focusing on what do I actually need and learning to honor that, that's been the whole journey, from over giving, over sacrificing, over performing, to going, what do I need? Okay, I might need to just take a time out, or I'm fine, just give me a minute. Yeah, it's definitely self. A better understanding of myself helps to see that patterns from the balcony.
Thanks. Thanks, everyone. Yeah. Andrea? It's checking. Okay.
Yeah,
So where we want to just still go, just 1 or 2 thoughts. Obviously, if you're working with a couple, you need to know your defense mechanisms pretty well. Yeah. And so here's the thing that can catch you off guard. Sneaky Enneagram 1s that are here. Reaction formation is like a curious defense mechanism. And that's that point in the couples coaching session where the one says something, but you can feel they actually mean the exact opposite. So they go, yes, that's a really good idea. Let's go on more date nights. I love that idea. The words seem really good, but actually the energy inside that is the exact opposite, which is like, hell no, I am so upset with you right now that there's no chance that we're going on date night this Friday because I'm going to do something completely different, you know? So it's that place where I feel one thing and express the opposite. So we say we're okay, but actually we're not. Or we say, we give a suggestion even, so let's go do something, but actually I don't want to do it. And it's a way of denying what would be called a bad impulse inside us. So you have to know that reaction formation play, because if you don't, you're going to miss some of and of course our bodies can tell us about the incongruence. As a coach, I can sit there and I go, it doesn't feel like that's really what you mean. But to know that that's reaction formation gives us an immediate way to get onto the balcony. Yeah. Or to know the way in which the Enneagram 4 takes something that actually belongs in the relationship or is something that the other person is processing, and then takes it on and go, oh yeah, I'm so awful, I'm so terrible, and I take the whole problem into me and I just vacuum it up and I like beat myself over the head with it, and I'm like, yeah, I'm so sorry I brought it up, I'm so wrong, I should never have done it. It's a really boring thing that us 4s do. Some of us would know it. But the core thing there is if you know the defense mechanism, you can give that pattern a name and you can neutralize it and you can go, let's just see what's happening here in service of the relationship, name the introjection, come back to the place where we have returned out of the defense into that. And part of what helps us with this is our regulation practices. And yeah, Andrea, over to you. And I think that's where we will end off some of our conversation today.
Yeah, so it's so important. We were talking about this with the Gottman stuff and the, you can't say in a session probably that your technology is broken and use that as the way to sort of force regulation happening. And so, as we talked about earlier, it's important for us going into sessions to regulate in doing the work. And it's also really important to teach couples how to do this. And so there are practices, as Lucille said, in the reports. But this is something that what I've experienced as I've talked to people, to couples about this, these are practices they're not even aware of. And so there are things that are so simple, whether that is like hand on heart and breathing together. And I do this even like when I get eye rolls, like it just, it may not be comfortable for them. And they also notice the somatic shift in their bodies when they are practicing regulation and co-regulation. So I try whenever possible to actually, even if it's maybe at the start of a session, to give couples just a little bit of instruction of how to do that together, and then maybe just take a moment to co-regulate. Or if things have been particularly spicy at the end of a session before sending them off, to try that as well, so that they can actually get into practice and it's not feeling like it's something that is a must do, but it's like, okay, we get to do this in order to be more masterful at how we engage with one another, at how we get to be, as Lucille says, up on the balcony. So it's a big priority to me, both for myself and for clients in the relationship. Anything you would add, Lucille?
Just the story. Like, okay, so my trifix is Enneagram 4 with a 5 and an 8. My 4 can be quite tactile, my 5 and 8, not so much. And so I have a partner whose love language in part is through physical touch. And sometimes part of the invitation he gives me is like, just like, don't put your hand on top of the blanket, just put it on top of my leg under the blanket when we're watching TV, it's like, just hold me a little bit here. And there's a part of me that can carry shame about the fact that I sometimes miss some of those cues, but it's also like his 927 and my 458 are not quite as attuned to each other's regulation needs, because I just, some of the physical ones I don't do so well. But I know that there is such a profound thing that I get from that practice of co-regulation, of just holding hands, which I would forget to take the hand. But once I take the hand, it's like, oh, yeah, that's so good. Oh, why did I do that earlier? So there's something really beautiful of building some of the awareness and the practices into sessions. And from the breathwork work that I do, one of the most beautiful things that I've seen with couples is where they don't come for a talking session, but come for a session to do a conscious connected breathing session together, where, each person is in their own process, but we're next to each other and there's a shared space around it. And then when people come out of that breath work and the two of them sit next to each other in the breath room, like often it's on the mat, we're not even on chairs, we're sitting on the mat, the incredible softness between people in that moment, and the ability to just speak about things in a heart open way that otherwise can be really, really hard. And so that's a big co-regulation process, a whole conscious connected breathing session, but just simple practices of, as Andrea said, like just quickly do that. Just put your hand on your heart where you are right now. Let's all co-regulate together. Put your hand on your heart. And let's just end the session together with 3 breaths. And what we'll do is we'll breathe in together and we'll sigh it out. So breathing in. A physical sigh is such a release of built up pressure. And another one in. And a third breath in. Thank you so much, everyone. It was really special to be in this space together. Let us know if you have questions about the couples report. Make use of our invitation and look out for the invitation to our upcoming couples coaching trainings. Andrea, it's been lovely to be in this conversation with me across time zones. It's time for your coffee now. You were up before the coffee. So thanks, everyone.
Thanks to all of you for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye.